Good afternoon. I should first of all congratulate Dr. Jyoti for this wonderful meeting of 2 days. You can call it an international diabetic conference. Very good, and keep it up. I'm going to introduce the speaker, Dr. Atul, who has his MD from Delhi University and is currently the consultant at Diabetes Endocrinology, Cardiff and Wales University, UK. He is the course director for the internationally acclaimed endocrinology diploma course, and is also a tutor with Cardiff University, and he has authored an MCQ book, and he has a number of publications to his credit, and I'm not going to stand between him and the new boy in the town, that is dapagliflozin.
Thanks a lot. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to fly about 5,000 miles to travel from a little country known as Wales, capital being Cardiff. It was a long journey. It took me a long stay at Delhi to travel to Trivandrum. I fell asleep, and in between, around at the last 10 minutes of the journey when I woke up, there was greenery all around. I could see the sea, and this was the sight which will stay with me for life. It's definitely God's own country. I'll talk about dapagliflozin. I know about this molecule since year 2007, when it was known as BMS 512148. It was just a number rather than a drug. I was very skeptical about this molecule. I thought, how can something which just makes you wee out more glucose in the urine going to be effective at all? Think about it. Anyone with diabetes definitely has glycosuria. So what's the rationale of using a medication which makes you wee around 70 grams more of glucose? It's been used in European Union since 2012. In UK, the National Institute of Clinical Excellence approved it in 2013 May. We've been using it in our institute for last 2 years or so. 2014 beginning, approved in the last version, that's USA after the FDA approval. I've been told it's been used in India since May 2015. It's available in around 57 countries. Now, talking about dapagliflozin, we've got a wealth of information at the moment. It's not like the glitazones which came into the market back in 90s with a bang, and by 2008, 2009, the bubble burst. Before the approval, the SGLT2 inhibitors went through lots of trials. At the moment, there is data available for 4-year use of this medication. Del Prato and the group, the Italian group, published a data in 2015 in Diabetes Obesity Medicine. There are more than 193,000 patients who have used this medication. This data which I'm presenting to you is only from the beginning of the year. So the things have rapidly changed. There are more than 20,000 patients who are enrolled in ongoing trials, the largest being the DECLARE-TIMI trial, the results of which will be available in 2019. Now, in front of this kind of elite audience, I don't have to talk about how the SGLT2 work. We do know, and I just heard Dr. George doing a wonderful presentation on diabetic nephropathy. Kidneys remain a very ignored kind of part of glycemic management. We always thought kidneys are to wee out the urine. We didn't know much about it. The key question to remember is there are only 2 organs involved in gluconeogenesis, pancreas, and the second is kidneys. So we have to think about this perspective in mind. So the SGLT2 inhibitors work on the S1 segment of the proximal convoluted tubule to block the reabsorption of glucose. Around in an average person who is a diabetic, the dapagliflozin used from 2.5 to 20, which was used in the clinical trials, leads to glucose loss by around 40 to 80 milligrams. Now, this mechanism of action is totally independent of the beta cell function. If you think about diabetes as a chronic inflammatory state, there was a beautiful lecture by Prof. Shishadri this morning, and I was very impressed by what he was saying. Diabetes is not a glucose-related disease. It's a chronic inflammation, and we have to move away from the glucocentric approach. So what we know at the moment is, once somebody is diagnosed to have diabetes for the first time, the disease probably has been brewing in for 5 to 10 years prior to the diagnosis. So once you see somebody, it's the tip of the iceberg. 10% of the patients already have got complications, even higher number if we talk about the retinopathy part. So there is a question about redefining diagnosis of diabetes, moving the cutoff values per se, because all the cutoff values have been driven from the retinopathy studies. It will take me an hour to go through it, but I think I'll stick to the topic. The beauty of dapagliflozin is it works independently of the action of the beta cell. In fact, there is data suggestive that this molecule can reduce insulin resistance. If you think about diabetes, it's a anabolic dysregulation. We've got insulin, which is there, but there is a level of resistance to it, and glucagon. There are two players. So what happens with the use of this medication is it's probably having an impact on the insulin resistance per se. It does lower the blood pressure by 3 to 4 millimeter of mercury, and in some trials, its results were equivalent to that of bendroflumetazide, the thiazide diuretics. Very impressive. These lead to loss of around 70 gram of glucose in the urine. Converted into kilocalories, 200 kilocalories. If you think about it, 1 pound of body weight, fat is equivalent to 3,500 kilocalories. That is around less than half a kilogram, 0.45 kilogram. To burn 0.45 kilogram of body fat, you need to burn 3,500 kilocalories. In a way, if you're on dapagliflozin, you can lose this much of kilocalories in urine in under 2 weeks. I'll give you a perspective about it. I do lots of running. If I run a marathon at a pace of, that's 42 kilometers, at a pace of 10 kilometers, 9.5 to 10 kilometers per hour, I'll need to run a marathon to lose this much of kilocalories. I was recently in a race and I had a strong temptation to use this molecule, but obviously for the ethical reasons, I'll not encourage it. The efficacy of this molecule has been established in a comprehensive phase 3 program. It's been used in over 7,000 patients, phase 3. It's been used as monotherapy, as an add-on to metformin, insulin, DPP-4 inhibitors, glitazones in fact. And there are some special studies also. So there is robust data supportive of this molecule. Across all the groups, there has been a consistent reduction in HbA1c, which varies from the trial to trial. But on an average, there is a drop in HbA1c by 0.5 to 1%. I'll come to our own experience in next few slides also. The reduction in the HbA1c was higher in the patients who had poorer glycemic control. No surprise about it. And I've been told that more than 50% of the patients in our country, India, have got HbA1c average of 9%. So if you're using an agent which lowers it more in a poorer glycemic fashion, it makes sense to use it. The additional benefit of this molecule is weight loss. I was very skeptical about why will it make somebody lose weight. Initially one can understand. They are having osmotic diuresis, that's fine, but if you're losing around 400 mils of water every day, you probably will compensate. Most of us with the intact hypothalamic system will do whatever it needs to ensure we don't get dehydrated. Now the weight loss, the studies do indicate it's more visceral fat. There are studies which are dual energy absorptiometry 1, which show over a period of 52 weeks, use of dapagliflozin was associated with loss of visceral fat. And if you think about diabetes as a heart disease, which I'll say we should focus on and we should educate people around, what we have to remember is loss of visceral adipose tissue is something which will reduce your risk of dying of a atherogenic condition. Blood pressure reduction on an average 4 to 6 millimeter of mercury of blood pressure loss. Interestingly, there was a study which I read which said that people who used dapagliflozin, who were office goers, had more loss of blood pressure as compared to thiazide diuretics. And I was very skeptical about, again, why will it lead to more blood pressure loss and osmotic diuresis. So I asked my specialist registrar this question, and it's very good feeling when you are in control and you don't know the answers. You can always ask your PGs to go and find it and pretend that you know everything. So the answers, some of them came up, were plausible, that most of the time the office goers, there is increased level of stress, there is more tea and coffee consumption, so maybe more osmotic diuresis. We do know American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists back this up. It can be used as a monotherapy. It can be used if patient is intolerant to metformin. I don't want to advocate this medication as a first line. You can use metformin, remains the cornerstone of the treatment. It can be used as a monotherapy if somebody is intolerant to metformin. Please do not take metformin away. It can be used combined with sulfonylureas, with insulin. In UK, according to the NICE guidelines, we can't use it along with pioglitazone. And when we asked the question about it, they said pioglitazone increased risk of bladder cancer. And about a week ago, Professor Lewis in JAMA published article in which 10-year follow-up of patients on pioglitazone had no increased risk of bladder cancer. So there has been lots of negative press to the glitazones. They still remain. I think it's 1 out of 4 patients in America are on the glitazones. We have to remember they've been used for a while. They did get a bad press. They are extremely good agents to lower the insulin resistance. Now, I'll not talk about Indian diabetic in an Indian conference to talk about the epidemic of diabetes in our country. We all know the statistics are staggering at the moment. As diabetologists, as physicians, it's our role to be diabetes champion. I was so impressed with Prof. Mohan this morning. I think it was a touching kind of speech. We, the people who are living abroad, I still call India my country kind of, though been in Britain for over 15 years, we owe a responsibility to the country and the people. And what Dr. Mohan talked this morning definitely touched me, and if in any way we as an Indian doctor forum in UK can help in any kind of sense, we'll be more than happy about it. It will be a soul satisfying kind of thing if we can do something at the grassroots level. The fast food market in India is worth 11.3 billion. This data is from 2013. And what it mentioned is, within 3 years, by 2016, the use of fast food market will be doubled. So probably we are looking at staggering number of 20 billion. Yesterday at Delhi airport, I opened the newspaper, Times of India Delhi edition. On the second page, there was a fast food joint which was being advertised. It's pathetic. People in West are moving away from the fast foods. In here, we are embarrassing it. Probably we think it's socially a good thing to do, or I think as diabetes champion, it's our role to go to the grassroots level and then spread this message. A good lifestyle, a healthy lifestyle needs change in our behavior, our mindset, and that should only be possible if we, the medical practitioner, bring about a socio-political change. Right, I'll not talk more about the diabetes complications. In Indians, we've got more visceral adipose tissue. There is a very good group with Prof. Kunti in Leicester who does all the research in Southeast Asian population in Leicester and in UK. And they've shown increased CRP level, reduced adiponectin level, and waist circumference rather than going on the body mass index. ADA this time around said we should not rely on body mass index of more than 25 as a cutoff in Southeast Asian population. They lowered the bar to 23. So all we have to do in a clinic, which should be mandatory, is to look at the waist circumference. More than 90 centimeter in a man, more than 85 centimeter in a woman, warning bells should go in kind of. Diabetes is not glucose, it's a metabolic mayhem. diabetes does not come alone. It comes with high blood pressure, high triglycerides, increased level of LDL, the low density particle, which is again, and a low HDL also. So it's a whole gambit of it. We have high rate of CV complications, and again, the slides give me good time to read and catch up. In India Today, I think the latest edition, there was a staggering figure that we as a group in Indian, only 6% of us take up any kind of physical activity, which was symbolic. 6% of us are physically active as compared to 24% in the West, 21% in the West. Now, this is my favorite slide. When to use dapagliflozin? There was a good debate going on yesterday when I came in here. It was a session on the DPP-4 inhibitors, and very good session on the TECOs and the SAVOR study and when to use DPP-4 inhibitors. And at the end of it, I think there was a very positive message for the DPP-4 inhibitors. I'm very sorry to say, I beg to differ. In my opinion, and this is not being influenced by any pharmaceutical company or any biases, in early disease or newly diagnosed patient with diabetes, you've got a window of opportunity. We've got ample amount of data from the legacy effect in the metabolic memory to say intensive glycemic control at the beginning of the disease, the body will remember and thank you later. So how we can do it? Somebody who's recently diagnosed to have diabetes has got maximum amount of beta cell resistance at the time of diagnosis. And the beta cell decline has been there for at least 5 years preceding. So this is the window of opportunity for us to give a wake-up call to the patient. Wake-up call which has to be individualized. We as physicians can't do everything unless until there is cooperation from the patient. So that's the point when weight loss, as little as 3%, will make an impact. Diabetes, as I mentioned, we have to shun the glucocentric approach. We have to have a holistic kind of take in it. We have to think about LDL, blood pressure, waist circumference on the same go. We want 2/3 of these patients to not die of the cardiovascular disease once they are in their 60s or even 50s, I'll say. So what can we do? In my humble opinion, we should think about weight loss. We should reinforce the lifestyle that remains the cornerstone better than any medication. Rather than the DPP-4, SGLT2 with whatever initial 4-year experience has shown us should be the second line, if not the GLP-1 analogs. I'll not like to give a medication which will not address the pathophysiological need of diabetes. All we have to think about is, am I going to treat a number, that means a HbA1c, and bring it down, or I want to give a normal kind of physiology to the patient. So for me, somebody who's healthy, engaged, can afford, that's a very crucial question in Indian subcontext. We should be using an agent which can bring some changes to the overall metabolic profile of the patient. And if I have a free hand, I'll probably go for a GLP-1 analog, but I've been told it's very expensive and injectables are a big no-in here. Alternatively, SGLT2s, because they'll make a difference in the weight loss. They can be added along with the insulin in a burnt out patient because they'll reduce the insulin requirement. I'll come to these slides in next few minutes. The DPP-4s are more or less substituting the sulfonylureas in an elderly group of cohort of patients. They are safe, they are weight neutral, but more than that, I don't think they make much significant impact on the pathophysiology of the disease. If you want to read one paper, read about the Omnius octet by Prof. D. Fronzo. And it clarifies that we should have an aggressive. And one more thing which I want to add is, our traditional approach, and even in West, in management of diabetes has been wait and watch. Patient walks in, give advice about lifestyle, add in metformin, buy some time. Wait again, add in another agent, maybe a third agent, and then move to the injectables. Let's learn from rheumatoid arthritis. In rheumatoid arthritis, when I was doing my graduation in Maulana Azad long back, 25 years ago, we were using a pyramidal approach of management. Start with NSAIDs, they were hydroxychloroquine, colchicine and all, and then move on. They reversed the pyramid altogether. It's a chronic inflammatory disease, rheumatoid arthritis. Again, it's an immune-mediated disease. And what about diabetes? We heard Prof. Shadri talking about it in early morning. It's a chronic insulitis. It's a chronic inflammation. Why should we have a pyramidal approach here? Why not go aggressive at the very beginning? We were very apprehensive based on the landmark trials. Accord, Advance, VADT, I can go on about it. Why the Accord failed? Hypoglycemia. And last year I had an opportunity to listen to one of the primary investigators in Accord, and he said, I'm the most misquoted individual or investigator around on the planet. If we can control diabetes, sense the hypoglycemia in an aggressive manner. Aggressive does not mean that you have to give hypoglycemia, but if we can manage by giving something which will lead to weight loss rather than weight gain, and there is no risk of or low risk of hypoglycemia, we should intensify the control. So what I say is that we have to have a real think about how we manage it. Let's be aggressive at the onset. Just brief slides about the 4-year data by Del Preto group. They compared it with sulfonylurea, published March this year in Diabetes Obesity Medicine. The weight loss was sustained. You don't regain the weight unless until you put up the weight by changing your lifestyle again, reverting to the same again. The weight loss, as I mentioned, is more visceral adipose tissue and low risk of hypoglycemia at 4 years. Sulfonylureas, the commonest we use in UK is gliclazide, not glimepiride, and gliclazide is associated with 1 in 3 patient experiencing a hypoglycemic episode in a year, which mostly goes unreported. It's a minor one, but 4% of the patients do need admission for it. As an add-on to insulin therapy, because its action is totally independent of insulin, in a study by Professor Wilding, there was a decrease in insulin requirement by 18 units if dapagliflozin was added on. And these results were sustained over 2 years. Time is running short. I probably will skip some slides and everything fine. You read something in the research and the publication. You don't go by what's written in the books. You make your own impression about it. With this in mind, we started an audit. We presented it April this year. We had only around 85 patients at that time. I've got around 4 times the data at this stage, but my postgraduate is very busy at the moment. He'll do it at a later stage. I can't force him to do an audit for me, unlike India. So we had around 85 patients. We used this agent, and if you look at it, the baseline parameter, the weight in an average Welsh individual was 100 kilograms. HbA1c was around 9.8%, which dropped to around 7.3 or 7.2, and there was a blood pressure drop by around 4 to 5 millimeter of mercury. So more than anything, use of this molecule at our local level has given us the confidence that this molecule works if we carefully select the patients. So the side effects, it does not lead to hypoglycemia on its own. If somebody is on insulin, reduce the dose by 10%. The trials say 50%, but reducing it by 10% will probably balance out the cost also. You can warn the patient about urinary and genital infection. I'll probably not like to use it in an elderly lady with a prolapse and all, who is prone to UTI, probably a middle-aged man who's otherwise well. This is a good agent, and I believe it's a second-line agent after the metformin. Volume depletion, I'm not sure about the Indian, there was a high humidity level here, but if you want the patient well, I don't think 400 mils will lead to significant damage. Briefly mentioning about the diabetic ketoacidosis part of it, euglycemic diabetic ketoacidosis, only 20 case reports in the FDA and around 140 odd through the EMA. I'll not recommend it in type 1 diabetes. I'll warn the patient that if you are reducing your caloric intake, be careful about this medication. I'll not stop the insulin. I'll reduce its dose. So I'll go, as I said, time is short, otherwise I would have given you the pathophysiology of it. Use it like metformin. It has got a very short half-life, around 12.3 hours. CV safety, as far as we are aware, its early results are promising. It's not leading to any adverse cardiovascular outcome. The big study, the DECLARE-TIMI, will come out in 2019, 17,000 patients in there. Renal safety, let me reassure you. If the EGFR drops, its efficacy is reduced, it's not toxic. So the biggest misconception which our primary care was facing, that we shouldn't be using it, it's leading to toxicity. There'll be a slight decline in the EGFR when we start to use this medication, which is due to osmotic diuresis. But overall, over a period of few years, it does not lead to any kind of damage to the kidney or toxicity. And we have to remember, there are some early studies which say, I'm sure Prof will be interested in it, that it lowers the intraglomerular filtration pressure. And I think we just have to watch this space. So when will I use dapagliflozin? Probably early in the disease, in patients who have hypoglycemia as a concern, who have weight loss as a desirable criteria, and as a insulin sparing agent. Just to sum up, I've taken longer than what the watch is showing 000. It has got an insulin independent mechanism of action. There is 4-year data available. It's been used extensively, around 193,000 patients, low risk or no risk of hypoglycemia on its own, and once daily dosing. Just to show you the slide, this is a book I had written for the specialty certificate exam. That's the MRCP part 3. I'm also an examiner for PACES, and I probably will look forward to visiting Chennai one of the days. I think one of my colleagues, Dr. Obubi, visited it last year. This is a book which I had written for the specialty certificate exam in endocrinology. And this is me at the finish line of a 42 kilometer run. That's the Liverpool Marathon. You can see from my expression how grueling it would have been. I was totally crammed and knocked out afterwards. So there was a smiley picture which I replaced. I thought, like, this gives my expression. So diabetes is quite similar. It's a long journey, it's grueling, it's taxing. But as physicians, as clinicians, it's our duty, our role to do something at an early stage. And probably more than the medications, maybe, it's the lifestyle modification advice, which we have to go out as ambassadors at the grassroots level and spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Atul, for that talk and for your patriotism. It's a new drug. There will be a lot of questions. We have overshot the time, so we will not have any questions. If somebody is very impulsive, just 2 questions, as Dr. Jyoti has done. 2 questions.
So you have quoted Defonso. The ominous of kid have been quoted several times over the last 48 hours. And you also said that malignancy, the renal, the complications of pioglitazone has faded. And so what will be your second choice after metformin? Is it pioglitazone? Is it insulin resistance that matters? Or is it dapagliflozin?
Whatever the press has gone through with the glitazones, pioglitazone and rosiglitazone definitely showed very positive results. We've all used them. They were extremely good to lower the insulin resistance. With all the bad press and the way the National Health Service is working, I'll not try to risk my GMC number by using pioglitazone as a second line. We are using dapagliflozin in our institute more or less as a second line agent. We probably have to think about the socio-economic context in here. If it's a poor patient who can't afford it, and I was reading the prices of the sulfonylureas, Dionel, it still costs 1 rupee a tablet, even less than that. In a poor patient who can't afford it, that probably remains my second choice. But I'll prefer SGLT2 over pioglitazone any day as the current environment stands.
Thank you. And the concluding remarks as a senior physician would be, it's a new drug, you try it, and we will get the answer in another 5 to 10 years. That will be my comment. Thank you, Dr. Adul, once again.
Thank you, Dr. Adul Kalhan and Dr. Matthew Thomas.